Okay, we'll get started here. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Lawrence Morserow, and I'm the head of product marketing for Quiq. Quiq is a software company with a digital engagement platform used by top brands. Our business messaging, web chat, and bot technology help brands deliver amazing customer experiences. I have a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. First, this webinar will be recorded. We will share it with each of you within the next 24 hours. Second, the format of this conversation will be a panel discussion. To make time even more helpful to you, I encourage you to submit questions into the Q&A. So let's get started. With our lives and consumers' lives being disrupted by the pandemic for the unforeseeable future, businesses are evaluating how to engage with customers going forward. There's an uncertainty as businesses of all sizes tighten their belts and look for ways to increase productivity without sacrificing service. Joining me today are Ian Jacobs with Forrester Research. Forrester is the leading analyst firm around customer experience, and they work with businesses to develop customer-obsessed strategies to drive growth. In addition, I'm also excited to introduce Thomas Crawford with Mortgage Center and Devlin O'Neil, who was previously with Lululemon. Guys, thank you everybody for joining us today. Before we dive into Ian's presentation, Thomas and Devlin, would you like to share a little bit about yourselves and what you do? Devlin, why don't we start with you?
Sure, thanks, Lawrence. Great to be here on the webinar this morning. My name is Devlin O'Neil. I live in Vancouver, Canada. I've recently been the technology manager at Lululemon, where I served in that position since 2015. So in my role at Lululemon, I was in charge of overseeing all the various platforms and technologies that were used in our customer experience center. Lululemon, for those of you who may not know, is an athletic retail apparel company. They have over 400 stores in North America and a huge online presence. So it was a pleasure to serve in that role. And I've recently taken some time off to spend time with family.
Excellent. Thanks, Devlin. And we're thrilled to have you here too. Thomas, how about yourself?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you again for having me here as well. So I'm Thomas Crawford. I'm the IT manager at Mortgage Center out here in Michigan. So we're in the Detroit area, and we provide mortgage services to credit unions. So we are a credit union service organization that helps out credit unions that don't have a mortgage department. So we offer mortgages to their members. We are owned by 4 credit unions here in the Michigan area, and they expand their business into Ohio, Wisconsin, Michigan, of course, Illinois, and Florida. And I am responsible for all the technology oversight here at Mortgage Center. I do have a small team of 12 individuals that work in our technology department, so I'm happy to be here today.
Excellent. Thank you both. And now for the man of the hour, Ian Jacobs. Why don't you introduce yourself, and then we can go into your slides as well.
All right, thanks, Lawrence. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. I know we got all excited about webinars at the beginning of the pandemic. It was, ooh, social interaction, and maybe now we're getting a little videoed out. So I really appreciate you taking the time to spend it with us. And I do think it's a very interesting topic because the pandemic has definitely influenced a lot of brands to move in this direction. And we've got to actually now build on that and make this a more mature approach to messaging and bots, and not just keep throwing it in to the mix and see what happens. But anyway, I'm Ian Jacobs. I'm a principal analyst here at Forrester, focus very heavily on both customer experience and agent experience issues. And obviously the things we're going to talk about today also have an impact on the human beings who provide customer service inside your organizations, whether they are in contact centers or potentially like Lululemon in retail that might consider actually incorporating some of these technologies into what had been a traditional brick and mortar organization. So I know that's a long-winded intro, but thanks everyone. I'm going to dive into my content. And one of the things that I've been thinking about because of all my conversations with customers around the issues of the pandemic is when they had described their customers' experiences a year ago, everybody thought they were a special snowflake. Their organization was very different, and that their customers were different than everybody else's customers when they were interacting with the brand. Well, I think that the crisis really has made us see the commonality, even if we can't do the physical fist bump anymore. You know, congratulations, brands, we're all the same. On the next slide, I have a kind of a joke about it, because what is that commonality? Well, we were one nation or one globe on hold, right? Everybody's customers just had to sit and suffer through really terrible queues. And by terrible, I don't necessarily mean that the queue time was very long. It's that often the queue times did not match the brand promise to consumers from a year ago. So even a half-hour queue time for brands that seemed very customer obsessed before that would be a compellingly bad experience. And on the next slide, you'll see that this hit everybody, right? You know, so there were airlines with 10-hour queue times, financial services were getting hit with it, credit cards, retailers certainly we're seeing the same problems. And brands had to react, right? They had to do something. One of the things that I found very interesting about the reaction to these massive queue times was, it's not the surprise that brands were turning to digital means to try and alleviate some of this pain in the contact center. What's interesting is that many brands actually had these kind of digital initiatives planned, but they couldn't get funding or executive buy-in a year ago. And now all of a sudden, there was a huge number of green lights in front of you, like, do what you need to do to make this work. And again, if you were a brand like that, you're not alone. So I don't know that any of you like me are geeks enough to sit there and listen to earnings calls regularly. But on the next slide, I have a quote from Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella from their recent earnings calls from about 3 weeks ago. And when he was talking about their customers, and they've seen 2 years worth of digital transformation initiatives in 2 months. And what he's talking about is exactly that, that world that I was talking about, where there was a backlog of demand for these things. And now all of a sudden, boom, we're there, we're doing it. So it's not that there were 2 years of transformation, it's what would have taken 2 years of projects. Now, boom, we're just doing them in 2 months. And one of the things that I think is critical to think about here is, okay, we're deep into this crisis, and many of us are actually starting to try and figure out what a mature organization would look like with the kind of resiliency that we need coming out of this, so that we're prepared for whatever the universe throws at us next. And one of the things that we've come to realize is that we're not going back. We're just not going back to the world that we used to live in. We can't go back to that world, nor should we want to. Just from a labor model, if you were working with outsourcers in the Philippines or India, for example, the whole notion that that was going to give you the resiliency to weather any crisis has been shown to be less than true, right? The fundamental assumptions that we made about what we needed for resilient and vibrant customer service organizations were shown to have cracks in that foundation. So on the next slide, I point out, you know, the genie ain't going back into the bottle, or the lamp if you're an Aladdin traditionalist, whichever you want. I kind of like I Dream of Genie, so we'll go with the bottle. And I also love that that is Genie actually going back into the bottle after I say it won't, but okay. The point here is these initiatives that you've invested in are not ones where you can all of a sudden just say, okay, the world's back to the way it was mostly, and now let's just turn off these bots we built, and let's turn off these digital channels and go back to a phone-based organization. You've now changed the customer service experiential promise to your customers. You said, hey, we're going to make this more convenient for you. We're going to be able to provide you service in multiple different channels, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There is no more contact center is closed, because now we have automation that can help, right? We can't go back and retrench based on the experiences that we've already been providing to our customers. So I actually say to our customers, now is the time to rethink what customer service is. As I said, the fundamental assumptions we were making, or at least some of them, proved to be untrue. And we've now seen benefits from technologies that we were always interested in, but we couldn't get buy-in for it. Now we can. So in a report recently, here's how I put it on the next slide, that you should think about this as an opportunity. This is a tabula rasa. It's time for you to remake the customer service organization in the image that you now see you need. So really, we're not just trying to go back to what you had before, where you had hired, 1,000 agents to work the phones, and we're going to cram them cheek by jowl into a brick and mortar center. None of those things are likely going to be true anymore. We're probably going to have more dispersed workforces in less than potentially ideal environments for voice calls, right? So even from that perspective, you may not want to go back. But also, as I said, you've now proven some of the value here. And if you have not proven the value of these digital transformation initiatives, your competitors have. And so now you're playing catch up. And really, you can't retrench when people who you're trying to win business from are marching steadily ahead in these digital initiatives. So I know that my esteemed colleagues here, Devlin and Thomas, are going to talk about the kind of experiences that they very real world provided the clients during this crisis and how they're going to handle that going forward. But I think really you need to think about what the ideal workforce looks like, who it is you're hiring and where they're working, and most importantly, what skills they have. Hiring voice agents and then saying, okay, now go do digital may not work that well because you didn't test whether they could, type 5 sentences in a row that were grammatically correct. You hired them because they have a nice empathetic tone in their voice and a customer service outlook. That's great, but it may not work for digital. So you need to rethink that. What a customer service process looks like, where automation fits in, where human beings fit in, what automation is actually good for, and where you really need human beings to provide the kind of empathy that only a human being can provide. So on the next slide, I'm going to give some real examples of where it is that we're just not going to go back, right? So I already mentioned that these digital transformation initiatives are being funded and they're being supported from the top level. The way that I think about it is that they were on the back burner and now they've been moved to the front burner and that burner's been turned up to boil. Like that's where we are. Again, once that happens, we can't go back. But I think interestingly enough, from a technology point of view, we've also seen a huge interest in demand for and investment in asynchronous interactions. Typically, that means third-party messaging channels, but it also means SMS, investment in messaging tools like SMS. And many brands who have high mobile engagement with customers, meaning like native apps that customers use all the time, are starting to think about embedding messaging into those brand-owned native experiences as well. And again, I think Devlin and Thomas are going to do a better job than I am of talking about why those experiences are compelling enough that you might think about retooling your mobile application to incorporate it, or your website, or your presence in WhatsApp and WeChat and other third-party messaging platforms. And as I hinted, we are starting to see a lot of interest in brands using the resources that they had, resources like retail employees in brick and mortar centers, or financial services people who worked in retail banking. I'm hearing the same from tax preparation companies who have a whole bunch of people in offices that consumers aren't that comfortable going into. You've already hired the customer service skills, the ability to do conversion and sell things to people. Now that there's an increased interest in e-commerce from customers, don't let those talents that you have go to waste and start to shift them into these channels. With messaging, you can really fit that into kind of a mixed workflow and a mixed workday. if there are real downtimes, or if retail outlets are still closed in certain areas or have limited hours compared to what they used to, you can now think, okay, you know, you were my retail employee, you're just going to serve customers the way that you used to. It's just going to be through messaging. So we see retail banking, again, tax prep, and several other industries thinking about ways to reuse the talent that they already have. So with that, I'm going to say, you know, Lawrence, I know you want to talk to the panelists because they've got the real world experience. So I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So let's transition over. So I've turned off the share screen, so we should be back into the grid. And Devlin and Thomas, let's jump in. Well, first of all, Ian, thank you for setting the stage perfectly for, you know, really where the businesses are at today and the things that we're focusing on. So I would love for Devlin and Thomas to kind of give us an idea of, well, let's talk about your teams first. So that way the audience has a good idea of, you know, how they can, you know, have similarities between the two of you. So Thomas, I'll start with you. If you can kind of walk us through like customer team, size, structure, and, you know, how they're typically handling things with customers right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, you know, we were tasked with the, you know, being in a financial services all-time historic low rates. So it was for twofold. People were taking advantage of the rates that maybe needed some financial help during this time. And also people were just taking advantage of the rates because they were so low. So we've seen, you know, where we would typically do, say, 300 or 400 applications a month in mortgages, we were seeing 1,200, 1,500, 2,000, you know, applications in a single month. With that, that required us to, you know, make more outbound direct communications to, you know, those teams. So we have a, you know, a team of about 25 loan officers, about 15 processors, and 8 or 10 closers that still have to handle the volume that they would, that's almost 3 or 4 times what they would normally have handled. So we had to figure out ways to get creative to provide communications back without having to make a phone call for every single touch point. So what we did is we started incorporating some automation in our messaging and, you know, trying to figure out ways to passively update those members throughout that process, so that we didn't have to, you know, make that phone call each time. And then typically when you make a phone call, everybody knows, it's been through the phone tag game, right? You make a phone call on your lunch break to somebody because you only have a set amount of time. You get their voicemail, they call you back while you're working again, and then you have a break, you call them back while you have a break, and they're busy again. So it's, you know, it takes 4 or 5 attempts to make one touch point. Where with messaging, we could have multiple touch points, you know, throughout that same time frame, and potentially even move things along the process quicker, which provides a better experience for the end user, and also a better experience for, you know, the people working in that scenario. So we had a very, you know, small team that had to handle an extreme amount of new business and still provide the best service we could.
Excellent. Thanks, Thomas. That was perfect. Devlin, can you speak to your previous role?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Lawrence. The customer experience team at Lululemon is also kind of known as the Guest Education Center. They kind of have 2 main locations. It's a global operation. They have 2 main locations serving North America business. One is located in Vancouver. The other is just outside of Toronto. Each of those locations held about 300 agents per site. Lululemon also operates customer experience centers in Hong Kong, in Korea, in Japan, in Australia, and New Zealand. So our technology team did support, and our platforms did support, you know, those teams globally. You know, some of the main types of interactions that you'd expect the customer experience center to have or support would be questions around our products or the items that we're, you know, selling on our digital e-commerce websites, and just assistance with the checkout experience and anything kind of related to post-purchase. And those types of things could be order tracking questions or returns, etc. You know, I think the business has been booming for Lululemon for a number of years. You know, the pandemic kind of impacted our business or Lululemon's business in a couple ways, some favorable, some unfavorable. The most unfavorable part of it had to do with the closing of the retail stores. So because of those stores needed to close for a number of months, that kind of left a lot of our customers, kind of going to our digital channels to, make purchases or browse products, etc. The boom was that, athleisure as well as like home fitness activities took a big increase, and a lot of people found that working in Lululemon became the uniform of the home worker or home office. So those definitely did have some benefits. So I think those trends will continue through the remainder of the year. So we're excited about that.
Perfect. Thank you. So for both of you guys, when you made the decision to turn on messaging, right? What was that decision factor to say, hey, this is a channel that we need to turn on, but then also speak to, what was that rollout like as well? Thomas, I'll let you start.
Play on mute, sorry. Yeah, for us, we were kind of, using the product. We weren't fully all into automating it, right? So that was really the big change for us, was we were leveraging it. We were using it kind of as a support system to our current processes. But then it became very obvious that we had to use this as our primary means of communication, just due to the volume. And then we had to figure out, well, how do we automate some of this so where we're still sending meaningful messaging to the consumer without it seeming too, automated, if that makes any sense, because, you don't want to, everybody's gotten the flyer in the mail to sign up for the service that you already own, right? So we want to make sure that it's contextual and that it makes sense. So for us, there was with the volume, we couldn't make those outbound dials in the time frame that we had our SLA set for. Our SLA is to follow up with those online inquiries within 4 hours. That's kind of our internal SLA as well. At that type of volume, it was taking 4 days to get to those follow-ups. So we had to figure out a way to put the ball back into the requester's court, right? So our consumers, what we did is we set up an appointment kind of generation automating texting so that we could text those members as they applied or had inquiries online, and then give them some options to schedule an appointment with a banker or whatever it may be. And then that allowed the banker to block that off in their time. And then they can, instead of playing that voicemail tag, if they still needed to communicate over the phone, they had a set time frame that they could communicate. So that was a big win for that, to set some expectations up front, and then also just kind of give some turn time estimates. Say, hey, it's extremely high volumes. Our normal turn time is affected by this. You can expect someone to be in touch with you by this time, or you can set an appointment with us now, type deal. So that was really important. And then just trying to figure out other ways to continue that follow-up process, because anybody that's been through a mortgage process, it's not just one touch point, right? You don't just talk one time and then move on. So throughout the process itself, where does it make sense to provide an update that's more passive? Because what can happen is you could be, as a consumer, kind of waiting and wondering, well, where do we stand? What are the next steps? And because of the volume, we're only just triaging stuff that come in. So so that's one new thing that we're working on right now, is identifying how do we provide some passive updates throughout our process that makes sense. So, okay, we've got the intent to proceed. There's some compliance related items there. They've signed their documentation to move forward. Well, immediately then we can ask them to pay their app deposit to move their application forward. So we could send an automated text with a link directing them to pay their app deposit. They can pay it mobily. Instead of having to get on the phone and give credit card information over the phone, things like that, we kind of offer up that self-serve kind of approach to that. So that's really helped, alleviate some of the pain points that the consumer has been receiving, because we've gone from, say a 35-day closing time frame to 90 plus days right now, just based on the volume that we're experiencing. This is industry wide. Everybody's experiencing the same thing, but the consumer doesn't have a lot of empathy for that, right? Because the consumer is like, well, I just want my mortgage and I need to refinance. So I need that money now to, maybe I'm laid off, or I'm at a reduced cost, or my spouse is laid off, or partner, or whatever it may be, and I need some extra money, or there's new expenses due to COVID. They need this money to help them get through these times. So they're still very anxious. And then if you're just kind of left in the dark throughout the process, it can become frustrating and a bad experience.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And those are awesome use cases as well, Thomas. And the rollout to your agents, was it easy? Was it difficult? How was their transition in using a new form of communication?
I think for them, they were thankful that they had another way to kind of set their day up for success, right? They could send out some group messages out, maybe to touch on, maybe they had the same message for 10 or 15 people they wanted to send out, so they could utilize some mass messaging. And then they could kind of, as those come back in, as they trickle back in, they could work those into their day. So it helped them, I think, organize their day better, and being able to kind of send it and forget it and then get back to it, because nobody expects a text message to be immediate. So it's not like you have to be right there, right on it when it comes back in. You can wrap up what you're doing right now and kind of move on to the next thing. So the buy-in from the user perspective, they were very thankful to see that there was another way to communicate with our members that didn't require a phone call or an email, because nobody really reads email anymore. It's just kind of a dying
Yep.
channel.
No, agreed. So let's transition back over to retail, back with you, Devlin. What clicked for you of saying, messaging is where we need to go? And, what was your rollout like, to your internal teams?
Yeah, Lululemon's been fairly innovative in their thought process about messaging for a number of years. So we actually introduced SMS as a new contact channel in 2017. The opportunity there was really around connecting with our guests or customers on the devices that they were kind of already using. So rather than having to come to our website to communicate with us, we thought that our guests would prefer to message us directly with the native messaging apps on their phone. So we were kind of in this business a little bit, for a few years before 2020. I think 2020, we had, even prior to COVID, kind of thought about how we were going to take that messaging level to the next, or take that messaging components to the next level. Introducing new channels were something that we were focused on prior to COVID. So things like Apple Business Chat, Google Rich Messaging were a couple of really key channels that we thought would be, of core value to our customers. When the pandemic hit, obviously, as Ian was kind of mentioning, those projects, kind of took top priority, and we launched with Quiq's platform in late June, before an online event. And yeah, the rollout of that process was actually quite seamless. We did transition the existing messaging platform that we did have and just migrate those channels over. Took a little bit of configuration and training for our agents, but we were up and running within a matter of 2 to 3 weeks of signing a contract.
Yeah, which is fantastic. That's great.
Yeah.
Really happy that rolled out as well as it did. So let's transition now. We've been talking about messaging. Let's talk about the other topic that we wanted to touch on, which is bots. And Thomas, I know you've been rolling out a number of different bots. Would you be willing to talk about how those bots are really helping you out?
Yeah, so we've been focusing, like I said, a lot on the outbound communications because of the black hole that you can kind of get sucked into in a mortgage process. So we've used this for our triggers program. So we have essentially a program set up with Experian that monitors credit triggers for people that could be shopping for a home. And what we do is we're monitoring our own portfolio. So this helps with a couple of things. It not only brings in a new revenue, but it also stops some bleeding if somebody's paying off of someone else. And some of that can just be inadvertently, or they've gotten an offer from somebody in the mail, or whatever it may be. So we monitor those, and then with that, we kind of send out some automation around that says, we see you've been shopping for a mortgage. Please let us know if we can help you with that. Also for new potential clients, it also, a lot of times in the credit union space, you don't necessarily coordinate or correlate mortgage with credit union. So for us, it's somewhat of an awareness and an education for them. Like, hey, did you know your credit union offers a mortgage option? And, we're usually pretty competitive on rates and service. And one of the big things for us is we service the loans too. So we don't sell it to a third-party servicer. So that's, keeping that in the credit union community, so to speak. Our credit unions invest in the loans. Not all of them. We do government products too, but we have a huge credit union portfolio, so that allows the credit union to reinvest in the community. So that's a really big thing, and a lot of people just don't know it. So wherever we can try to automate some of that through different stages. One of the other things that we have a use case for is for our Google reviews. So if someone, we have an internal survey system that sends out a survey after they've closed, just to kind of ask how their experience was, the typical NPS score, which you would expect us to measure ourselves against. And then if they do leave us a good review, because we do get those, we also kind of send them out to our Google site and say, hey, thanks for the review. Would you mind leaving us a Google review? Because, that's nowadays in the digital age, everybody checks your Google review before they, eat there or stay there or do business there. You want to see what other people are saying. So that always helps too. And we've seen great success with that. We've actually been able to turn our Google score when we first started this from a 3.4 up to over 4. We're hovering right around 4.1. And that's just been through these great experiences that they're having. Unfortunately with consumers, or fortunate is what it is, sometimes you don't leave a review unless it's a bad experience. If you had a great experience, you may not take the time out to do that. So we've seen great success with that. And then also with our pre-approval. So when you're shopping for a home, you want to see what you qualify for. So you may call in, run your credit, we'll get you a pre-approval letter, and then you're off shopping. And that could take, sometimes short time, sometimes 2 years. We've seen plenty of people shopping, especially in the Michigan area. There's a real big shortage of new builds because of the 2008 crash. Everybody remembers that time. We had a lot of construction companies kind of go out of business, or people with skilled trades leave that trade, so that the home inventory has been very slow to rebound from that. So you see people post their home for sale, and then they sell it and they have nowhere to move into. So they end up shopping for a home for quite a while. So that allows us to just kind of keep us in front of mind. We send out some automations around that to remind them, hey, if you're shopping, here's some tips, some education on what to look for, schools, things you wouldn't maybe think about when you're shopping, and just keeps our name in front of them. If they do have questions, they can quickly respond to those. And it goes directly back to the loan officer that we send, based on this is from your loan officer. And then we have some other automations around closings. Once you schedule your closing, you can confirm your appointments. And then through processing, as I mentioned, we're building out a passive communication campaign where throughout those mortgage stages, we can send some automation out to them to kind of keep them in the loop as to what's going on.
Excellent. Thanks, Thomas. As I said, I know you had numerous bots, in play, which is great. Devlin, on the retail side, how are bots making an impact that go in conjunction with messaging?
Yeah, we addressed some of the what we were kind of calling low-hanging fruit, things that we could make an impact on quickly when we launched our bot platform. The first thing was just around gathering more information about the intent of the call, and kind of routing that interaction, to the right agents or the right channels, so that they could get the answers quickly. So that was something that improved our routing capabilities tremendously from what we had previously with our just SMS platform. The second one was around where's my order question. So this is actually a common scenario for a lot of retailers. Customers kind of doing follow-ups around where's their order and what's the tracking status of that. By providing that proactively, we were able to kind of reduce a tremendous amount of volume inbound to our contact center. Finally, kind of helping out with the returns process, creating some various different forms, for data collection around intents of why the returns were happening, and what was the product that the guests were happening. The ability to take photos of products and kind of upload those were something that was just a tremendous assistance in what is, for a lot of digital retailers, a big process and time-consuming process.
Oh, that's great. So, both of you have rolled out messaging and bots. Both of you guys were in charge of it. What were you guys looking at to measure success? How do you guys know that this was working? Was it a particular metric, or I'd be very curious to see what your perspective was of knowing if this was successful. Devlin, you want to start?
Yeah, I think as Thomas mentioned, like we were measuring our CSAT scores. What we didn't want to see is any kind of drops or fluctuations in those things. I think we wanted to maintain the same level of interaction experience with our automation tools as we were with our agents. The other thing was just interaction handling. How many interactions were we able to handle through a course of a day or per hour? So obviously our automation capabilities improve those scores significantly. And finally, were voice of customer reports. We had access to a lot more reporting capabilities because of the data collection and the reporting abilities for those interactions to be stored and reported on. We were really looking about reports on what our customers were saying with the interactions that they were having with the bots. Being able to capture that was just a tremendous amount of help for our managers and team members.
Oh, that's great. Thomas, I know you touched on the Google review. Was there another metric that you guys were also looking for to measure success?
I think for us, it was more about just getting more pull through, right? So our pull through rate for our initial contact to application, we went from about a 1% pull through rate to 12%. Just by introducing this new channel to be able to reach out to more people at any given time. So just that initial contact rate is huge because, like I said, you end up playing the phone tag game and then they've moved on to somebody else. Somebody else has grabbed their attention, probably through a text or another message along the way.
So Ian brought up a really good point, which is we're not going back, right? And I believe in Ian. I think he's absolutely right on that. What would you say has changed and what isn't going back to the past, based on your businesses right now? Devlin, if you want to start.
Yeah, I mean, the pandemic really created a shift from, in-store volume, kind of the balance. I mean, Lululemon is a really good example of a retailer that's, brick and mortar business is doing really well. So, what we did see with the pandemic was, a shift from, with the stores being closed, the option of visiting a brick and mortar store just kind of stopped. I think what's going to continue, certainly through the foreseeable future is a continuation of, resistance to kind of want to go into a brick and mortar stores and for various different reasons, and the growth of e-commerce. So, e-commerce has been steadily growing over the last 10 years or so, and it has been projected to continue to grow by 40%, over the next few years. So I think that trajectory is going to continue to speed up, and I don't think it's going to slow down. So, with that increase of e-commerce requires the amount of support required there for those types of transactions. So I think that's just going to continue moving forward.
Yep, I couldn't agree more. Thomas, how about you?
I would say for us, it's allowed us to prove we can do more with the same amount of staff. So you get a little bit overwhelmed with, say, for example, a processor normally handles 30 in their pipeline, and that was kind of their capacity before. Well, during this pandemic, they've had to handle 70 to 80 to 100, and they've been able to do it by utilizing some new tools and figuring out ways to improve their processes and utilizing the digital channel to communicate more. So for us, it's shown us that we can do more business with the same staff by utilizing and taking advantage of this new channel, and then really trying to figure out how do we continue to evolve our bots and our automations, and how do we provide a better customer experience throughout the process from end to end with this new channel, and it allow us to still keep the volume that we're at now and make it sustainable with, maybe adding some staff, but not like what you would have to add 3 or 4 times the staff if you're doing it the old way.
Yep. Nope, that's perfect. So Ian, I want to turn it back to you. We've been hearing from Devlin and Thomas, and I'd love to get your perspective on what you're seeing and hearing from an industry perspective. So let me pull up your screen again.
Okay. And so when we were walking through this content last week, making sure we all knew what we were going to say, I told Thomas that I was really jealous because, like maybe hundreds of thousands of folks, I also refinanced, and I did so with my credit union, but I'm out in California. and I did not have the advantage of being able to use asynchronous communications or bots. And so I was stuck with that. Okay, where is this in the process? What do I need to do? So I really, I mean, just from a personal level, I really wish I was in the Midwest so I'd been able to refinance through one of his credit union offers, because it would have been a much better experience. But Lawrence, you asked what we're seeing. We actually went out and tried to gather some data just on the growth of messaging. And we did a little bit of a cheat here, because one of the ways that you could go about this is try and survey hundreds or thousands of brands to figure out what they're seeing. But we actually went to vendors of the technology, like you guys, in fact, and asked, okay, across your entire customer base, what have you been seeing? And essentially we were asking from March till about July when we were gathering this data. So it's a sort of 3-month period. And we saw that there was a huge push in marketing using messaging, and you can see the growth there. But for the use cases that I think Devlin and Thomas were mostly talking about, we're talking about service E, including things like pre-sales, consultative interactions in the Lululemon case, right? That's a good idea. And obviously in mortgage, there's before you sign the mortgage, after you sign the mortgage, but then as Thomas explained, it takes a while. So we saw a total of doubling, like 100% growth from mid-March, early April to about July. And the trajectory had not slowed down. So I would imagine that in the couple of months since, it's more than doubled again. And so we are seeing a lot of it. And the reason that that's important is it's not just that brands are investing in it, but as Devlin and Thomas were saying, consumers are accepting of it and actually like the experience of it. When we asked overall what was like the biggest growth of interactions, third-party messaging was actually just behind mobile web. So we saw that everybody was on mobile and hitting the website doing FAQs and whatever, but once they started to interact, the biggest growth in that time frame was third-party messaging. And we have obviously been talking to brands about what they're getting out of it. Devlin and Thomas gave several examples that I'm going to talk about. On the next slide, I just list out sort of the top 5 benefits that our customers are seeing when they start to offer messaging to their customers. So the first one is something that both of the panelists talked about, which is sort of increased efficiency. You can do more just by the nature of the channel. The asynchronous nature allows you, and more importantly, the customer, to leave, come back. In some industries, that's more critical, like Thomas's, where the whole process is kind of stop and start that way. In some, though, like in retail, I may be interested in something, but then I have a call, and then I'll come back to that interaction even just a half hour later. In a typical contact center setup, you typically have to start again, re-explain what you're interested in, where the conversation was with messaging. You don't, so you have a more efficient agent experience there. Although Devlin talked about not seeing a dip in satisfaction, I think he was mostly talking about bots there. When we're talking about messaging, we're actually seeing CSAT go up. Again, for the convenience factor, if nothing else, right? I can control the pace of the interaction, and it matches my lifestyle. It is designed the way that I need it to be designed. Another reason for improved CSAT is broader channel choice. So we're seeing customers who are investing in Apple Business Chat. Again, retail, where somebody may look on a map for a brand, or Google for that matter, may look on a map for the brand's location and want to initiate a conversation from there. So we're seeing those channels take off, and that's a better customer experience because now the brand is offering interactions where I, the consumer, actually am in the process, even if it's not on a brand-owned property. Obviously, a reduction in call volume, even if that is just shaving off what has been a monumental increase in volume. So it may not be that you see volume go down from where it was a year ago, but you're seeing it not increase in the crazy way that it would otherwise, given the increased demand. And then improved business results. So we have talked to a client that sells bridal wear, and is actually doing commerce through this channel. And is, it doesn't take that many sales in bridal if you're doing high-end bridal for the numbers to really add up. One of the universities that we've talked to, that frankly I think is actually a Quiq client, had just processes that they wanted to streamline. They had students who actually had to provide a photo for the ID. And so just in improving compliance in that process, they saw an increased improvement. And that's sort of a quasi-public sector-y education idea of results. It's not dollars and cents, but it's improved efficiency of the organization and improved compliance with processes. So let me quickly, on the next slide, turn to, I'm not going to dive deep because we actually had a good example of why bots and messaging are, the Reese's peanut butter cup, chocolate and peanut butter go great together kind of thing. It's hard to think about, hey, we're going to open up interactions on 15 new channels without offering some automation. But as you heard from both Devlin and Thomas, there's actual benefits to the specific functioning of messaging in that downtime, for example, where you may be waiting for a response from somebody and you don't want the customer to be waiting, the bot may be there. So there are great reasons to think about it. On the next slide, I'm going to throw out some data that was pre-pandemic. And the reason that I'm throwing this up there is we asked brands why they were investing in these conversational interfaces. And you can see that this data was kind of an ongoing survey, like a panel survey. And we stopped data collection for this in February. So right before the pandemic really slammed into North America. And the data shows that brands pretty much twice as often were citing improved CX as the reason for investing in this. It's not like they weren't reducing costs. 44% said that was the goal. Of the 86%, which obviously includes some of the 44%, this was not an exclusive answer kind of survey, those brands are still achieving cost savings or efficiency gains. But it wasn't the actual point of the investment. It was an effect of the technology that they chose. But the goal was to improve CX. The reason I'm bringing that up, and we're going to turn to, this is the design for what you want for going forward kind of idea that I put out there. I'm just saying, don't forget that. Yes, the pandemic demanded that every business get more efficient. But don't forget that these technologies can actually be used in a way that drives efficiency as an effect of creating a better customer service experience or a better customer commerce experience, right? So have that be your North Star. If that's the North Star, the efficiency will come, but you've got to think about the improved CX. So this is a plea going forward. Okay, so back to you, Lawrence.
Yep, no, perfect. So I wanted to ask Devlin directly, you have 8 years of experience in retail. And just as like we just saw from Ian, there's a huge demand for a good customer experience. You and Thomas have both rolled out messaging and bots, and you've seen the success with it. Why do you think other retailers are reluctant? I'm curious if you can speak to it from an industry perspective.
I don't know if there's as much of a reluctancy as, there's just, barriers of priorities, possibly of assumptions about why, what's the better type of service that brands may want to give. I think in retail specifically, there's been a lot of challenge to the industry has happened because of Amazon, and that's just not with customer experience, but they're really kind of setting the bar in a lot of ways for what e-commerce and retail will be and how it is. So there's when you're competing with Amazon, there's kind of an expectation that you're providing that same level of experience that they are, to your customers, because that's the expectation now as a purchaser. Or because if you don't, you'll find a way to make those transactions happen. So I think there's just reluctancies amongst the priorities, but it's really kind of allowing outliers to kind of introduce and kind of steal market share from the established partners. So I think that trend is going to continue. One of the things that I'm particularly excited about is the growth of direct consumer brands that are wanting to make that connection directly with their customers. I'm an avid cyclist. And one of the markets that I'm familiar with as a cyclist is the traditional way of buying a bicycle in the past, where you go to a bicycle shop and you kind of buy whatever inventory they have, is really changing. Bicycle companies are now introducing the ability to kind of purchase those bikes online, and so you have that relationship directly with the bike brand and manufacturer rather than a third party industry. So I think you're seeing a lot of that shift, especially in boutique brands and trends, etc.
Awesome. No, that's perfect. I wanted to pivot back to an earlier conversation that we had, which is, your teams and how you guys, handle your customer service. And obviously you guys are dealing with CRMs. Devlin, I know you have experience with the Oracle Service Cloud. Thomas, you are a Salesforce ninja. Can you guys speak about what it was like adding, quick messaging and bots into those CRMs? Because I'm sure a lot of the audience members right now are probably on one of those CRMs, and they're probably curious about, I want to make the leap, but how easy is it? So Thomas, I'll let you go first.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we are a huge Salesforce champion here at Mortgage Center, and our entire, production team uses Salesforce in some capacity. So it only made sense for us to find something that had a tight integration to Salesforce, that we could leverage those built-in CRM data points that we already have, where they're at in the stage, where they're at in the process, utilize some of those workflow tools that Salesforce has built in and really marry that up with the technology that Quiq has. So for us, it was a great transition. Having the user interface embedded right in the Salesforce console really helps with user adoption. There's not another application they have to go to use, because the data is all integrated in there. They can utilize that data for smart tags or for snippets. And then I think you have a lot less objection to utilizing the tool. They don't have in the current role, our goal would be to get down to a single pane of glass for our users to use, where they have one thing to go to. Maybe it's one browser with multiple tabs, but years past, they may have had 15 or 16 different systems to go into to make something happen, and none of them talk together. So for us, a big thing is data sharing and automation wherever we can, to not only make the customer experience better, but to make the user experience better that you utilize in the tools. So for us, having that all right in Salesforce, right there, that they're already in there utilizing Salesforce for, it really helped with, I think, the user adoption and seeing the value behind utilizing a new tool and not having it being a burden to use.
Devlin, I'll ask the exact same question to you about, what it was like with Oracle Service Cloud and Quiq.
Yeah, I'd agree with everything Thomas said. I don't think our experience was any different, regardless of the type of CRM that we were using. I think just a point I'll make differently is, one thing that we were cognizant about is just, with so many choices of CRMs, if we were using Oracle today or Salesforce in the future or Zendesk in 5 years, would we be able to have a flexible platform that could kind of transition with that? So, we did a lot of research speaking to other Quiq customers, whether they were using Zendesk, Salesforce, or Oracle, what their experience was like. And what all of them said across the board is, regardless of the CRM platform, the Quiq was able to, integrate seamlessly and operate the same way. We actually had a really good reference from someone that was, had gone through a transition of the platforms, and they said that the Quiq component of that was, the easiest part of it.
Oh, you guys are going to make me cry. That was super, super nice. So I know we're running short on time here, and I wanted to circle back with Ian, talking about where you see bots and automation are heading, or where they should be going. So let me pull up your slide here.
Yeah, and okay, this will be quick. We're short on time, but the message is fairly simple here. Yeah, there we go. Next slide.
Yep.
So I'm in San Francisco, and I'm sensitized that I've built this slide before all the fires. So if you're triggered or traumatized, I apologize. Yeah, the idea was during the pandemic, the challenges were clear and great, right? There was this influx of volume. Retailers like Lululemon saw store closures and a huge demand for e-commerce. In their case, maybe even more because of the athleisure boom. But the same is true in financial services. And so brands said, what can we stand up in 3 days or a week? Those are the kind of bots that they were looking for. And that made perfect sense during the conflagration, when things were really on fire. But as I said, now should be the time where you start to think, what kind of experiences do I want to be generating going forward? And that probably will incorporate some of those simple bots to handle simple functions, but also more complex bots that can do lots of different things. For example, on the next slide, I list out alongside my cute anthropomorphized bot there, some of the pre-sales things that I talked about, helping with product recommendations. There are some brands, retailers, for example, who are already good at configuration, right? I have this kind of electronics component, which other components are compatible with it? And that's a great kind of train the bot on the product catalog, and it can now help sell the right product to the customer to actually alleviate the need for that customer to get customer support later. So it's a sales function that actually benefits customer service. Automating processes and not just answering questions, but actually taking on pieces of processes or the entire process, being able to handle more complex issues that may require several kind of disambiguation questions and conversational turns. Thomas was talking about reaching out to customers in a predictive way. I think being predictive and preemptive is actually a whole new terrain for bots and a great use case. So Thomas, thanks for proving my point there. Diving deep into verticals and understanding the processes that vertical industries go on, because your bot for retail is probably not, should not, and hopefully will not be the same kind of bot that you build for healthcare, right? You have very different goals, very different regulatory frameworks that you operate under. The bot should be built for those verticals. But I think the key here, and this isn't a type of bot, it's a way of thinking about the bot. And this is what I was saying before, think about CX, right? This should be a personalized and dynamic experience that does require understanding of customer data and being able to integrate into CRM systems, for example, to treat me differently than Lawrence, even if we ask the same question, because our situations are different. Or maybe our customer lifetime values are different, or whatever it is, right? Sometimes we should get the same answer, sometimes we shouldn't. And being able to create those dynamic experiences really will start to set the bot experience for your brand apart. So that's where I think brands need to be thinking and aiming their bot efforts going forward.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Devlin, and thank you, Thomas, for joining us today. This was excellent, great content, great perspectives, and I love how all three of you were completely in sync in, the benefits and the goals that businesses should have. So it's with that. Thank you so much for everybody that is today, and thank you again for our panelists. It was a pleasure having you guys here. So thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.